Hello and welcome to the Devon Man Shed, and a motorcycle build this time. I fancy building something with a bit of bling attached to it, because I'll build me planes, me World War I, World War II planes, and they're always painted in rather drab colours, and I just thought it'd be nice to build this. I've actually built a motorcycle kit at the end of last year. I made a video on it. It's up there on my channel, and that was a CB750, and that kit dated back to 1982. Now this one here dates back to 96, so I'm expecting this to go together a lot better than the last one did. Although I never had any fit issues with the kit. When I was doing some fine detail, I noticed that a lot of the mouldings looked as if it'd been damaged, and they obviously tried to repair it, etc. So I'm not expecting to encounter anything like this with this build. Yeah, it's a 112 Ducati 916. It's not really my cup of tea as a bike. I don't think I'd ever buy one in full size, but nonetheless it makes an attractive model. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set my camera up, and we'll open the box, see what's in there, and I'll go through with you what I'm actually planning on doing. So I'll see you then. Right, let's just quickly go through the contents here. Obviously this is the fairing. All seems pretty good. Now I think this is probably going to be the start of the build. This is the engine components. And then we've got the frame, the wheels, downpipes, swinging arm, a few odd bits and pieces. These components here are basically bits that get attached to the frame, such as the inner mud guard, the seat is obviously there, and the radiator fan, etc. Now this doesn't contain any chrome parts. It looks like this is a satin finish on this this particular sprue, which is helpful in a way, because if you've got chrome parts and the flash is bad on them, when you go to remove the flash, it basically ruins the model. So if I have to fettle any of these parts here, I can get away with spraying them. The silencers are probably representing stainless steel silencers, and the headstock here is probably aluminium. Tires, some components, nuts and bolts, etc. Some tubing to represent cabling, and a screwdriver as well thrown in. Instructions. First thing I've had to have a look at, I mean, they've got this list of colours here that I need, but to be honest, I'm not going to go spending money buying probably 8 or 9 of those paints, when probably the majority of them are only for touching up very small components. So what I have done, I've had to go out and buy some gold paint. So I bought Tamiya's gold paint. I wanted to buy Vallejo, but the model shop ain't got it, so this is a compromise. And also Tamiya do a red and a pot, but it's only sold as a red, whereas the aerosol can here is sold as an Italian red. So I'm under the assumption that this particular red in their rattle can is lighter than their bottled paint. Well, that's what I'm hoping anyway, because I don't normally bother buying rattle cans, because I use an airbrush. But if I don't get it the right red, it ain't going to look right. So my paints are all sorted out. I can cover all the rest of it with me Vallejo paints. Just some tips on the markings here. applying decals and reference numbers if you've got damage in the kit, and some tips. Right, so that's what I've got for £22 delivered, which I thought was quite a reasonable price. So there we go, that's the contents of the box, and the extra bits of paint that I've had to buy. So I'm going to set up my camera and start assembly. So I'll see you in a minute. Right, so away we go then, folks. First part. Now this involves the rear swinging arm, the chain and sprockets, the rear suspension system, the rear caliper, the rear disc brake, and then the suspension components then are attached to the swinging arm, and then finally there's a chain guard to be put on. Now all these components are generating 6 different coloured paints, and what I'm going to have to do is spray these parts before I put them together, otherwise it's a nightmare trying to mask everything up. So that's the importance of having your paints ready when you do a motorcycle kit. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to assemble all these parts and obviously spray them as well, and then I'll come back to you with the finished sub-assembly and have a chat with you regarding the fitting of everything, if I suffered any sort of paint problems, and I'll also go through with you what paints and glues I use as well. I won't go over this on every single clip of the sub-assemblies being built. I just thought I'd get this out of the way, being the first one, just to explain to you what paints I use and glues. So what I'm going to do is wave me magic wand, and here we have the assembly actually finished. I don't know how well that's focusing. Now that went together really nice. I had to remove a couple of seam lines, particularly along the side of the swinging arm, and I've had to do some brush painting. Yeah, I think it was the sprockets actually. That the sprockets have been hand painted, all the rest of it has been airbrushed, and all this has had a blanket spray of matte varnish to sort of calm things down and seal the paint as well, stop it from being damaged. If I were to leave that being sprayed with the metallic paints and all that, it just wouldn't look right. It's all very nice having a glossy look to everything, but it don't look right, so I tend to spray these parts here matte, makes them more sort of realistic. So that's the rear swinging arm done. Now the parts I used, or tools I should say I used, are basically a knife. I use these crocodile clips for holding the parts for when I'm spraying, which you'll see in later videos. I've got a pair of flush cutting pliers. They've got a flush edge on the back of here, so that when you cut them off the sprues it doesn't leave a great deal of plastic. The screwdriver that came with the kit, just a basic small flat file, 400 grade wet and dry, and that's basically all I've used at the moment, plus a pair of these tweezers. So that's the tools I've used so far. Now the glues, let's start with this here. This is a special white glue for gluing clear plastic parts. Now previous to me buying this, I was just using ordinary PVA wood glue and it was working really fine, but I thought I'd buy a dedicated glue for gluing the clear parts. If you were to use these glues, what would happen would be that these give off a vapor. They also react with the plastic and it makes all your clear parts go foggy. So it's always best to use a white PVA glue and when this stuff dries, it dries transparent. So if you've got any glue that oozes out anywhere, it's not so noticeable. I've got a medium grade viscosity super glue and an ultra thin super glue. I use an ultra thin cement here, which is applied by a brush, and I use this Revel glue here for the mainly parts. Because this is a thicker glue, I use it for parts that need to be suspended while they're gluing. And the reason I use this Revel is simply down to the fact that it's got a decent applicator. It's more controlled having this small tube on the end. There's no good or bad glues out there. It's all down to personal preference. So that's the glues I used. Now the paints I've used 3 Vallejo paints in place of the Tamiya ones they were suggesting. An 062 aluminium, 078 yellow and an 057 matte black. And the swinging arm was sprayed with a Tamiya paint, X32 titanium silver, along with the gold, which is X12, that's a gold leaf. And then finally it was given a blanket spray with Humbrol matte coat. Now these Vallejo paints naturally come in small bottles like this, but the Tamiya paints, they come in jars, and I find these difficult to dispense the paint from the jar into my airbrush. So whenever I buy these, I always tend to buy 2, and then I put them into these dropper bottles. Now these dropper bottles I scrounge from the guys at work who vape, so I've got quite a lot of bottles of these. I tend to put 20 milliliters in, which is 2 jars of those, and 10 milliliters of IPA or isopropyl, which basically thins it out. So I get 30 milliliters there. And same with the gold leaf. And also I always drop a nut inside these. Well, that one's not moving. Let's find one that's moving. There we go. Always put a nut in them. You can never tell whether the paint's still congealed at the bottom. If the nut's moving, you know it's starting to break it up. So that's basically it. Oh, this here is a super glue accelerator. You spray this on the super glue and it goes off immediately. I haven't yet used super glue. I do find it a bit of a bodge glue, but it has its uses. So there we go. That's the paints and the glues that I'll be using throughout this build. Tools as well. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to set up my camera and have a chat with you about the next stage, which is the engine. So I'll see you then. Right, so the engine assembly. Now the main block is glued in 2 halves. There's a starter motor that needed gluing, an oil filter. These I'll get back to you in a minute. There's a bracket here that needs to be glued to the side of the engine. A couple of other little tiny small components to be glued to the main block. We got this part here, which I'm going to speak to you about in a minute. We've got this cover and a few other little pieces that need to be glued, and the water pump down here and the hoses. Now the stuff that's shaded is obviously going to have to be sprayed a different colour. The main engine block is going to be sprayed aluminium, which isn't too bad a deal really. The only thing is, they're saying that this should be metallic green, all these other engine cases. I've gone online and searched Ducati 916 engine, and I've yet to come across one that's got these green accents on these other engine covers. But what I have found is some dark metallic grey covers. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to mix my own paint up using a metallic silver and a dark grey, and these that are shaded I shall spray those a dark metallic grey. The other parts need probably a matte black added, but all these parts here I can hand brush paint these small parts. It's not a problem. So I'm just going to do something what I feel is different to what they're telling me, but I really don't like that metallic green they're suggesting anyway. It looks bloody horrible. Anyway, the engine block has been glued together. All those little tiny bits of ancillaries have been glued, so that is ready to be painted in aluminium. These other parts are the ones I'm going to spray dark grey. They also need some other sort of hand brushing to be done on them, because these parts here are actually representing hoses, so they'll probably have to be painted matte black. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to set up my airbrush, and we'll do some priming. I think get all these parts primed, and I'll talk you through it as I progress. So I'll see you in a minute. Right, I'm all set up, ready to do some spraying. I've got my small parts attached to cocktail sticks and blue tack. I'm using a ultimate primer made by Badger, and this is probably the best primer I've come across for going through airbrushes. The only problem I've got with it is I'm nearly out of it, and everywhere I've tried to get hold of some more, they all seem to be out of stock of it. So it's very popular, but don't seem to be in abundance over in this country. I'm using a 3-year-old Chinese airbrush here with a 0.3 needle, and running at 18 psi, and this is designed to just spraying primers now, this one, because I've got a better airbrush that I treat myself to for the top coats. So I'm all ready to rock and roll here, so let's crack on. Yeah, I've watered that primer down a bit. It's a bit too thin now. I'm trying to stretch it out. This is just an enclosure I'm using here. I've got no extraction unit. I find it very difficult to find room in my shed to set up an extraction exit out of the shed, so I'm a bit restricted in space, but using these water-based primers, it's not too bad. Right, what I've done, I've got a silver and a black grey, and I've mixed them 50-50 to create a very dark metallic grey. So that's what I'm going to spray now, which is for the smaller engine cases and the other components. So we're going to see how that turns out. Right. Yeah, I think that might be alright actually. Not a bad first attempt, better mix. These will probably need a second coat anyway. Right, I've already given this a first coat. I'm using 062, which is an aluminium, and I'm using the other airbrush here, which is running at 18 psi, the same as the Chinese one, but this has actually got a bigger needle in it. This is a 0.4 needle in this. So for the second and final coat. Right, here we have the engine finally assembled, and that paint I mixed up didn't turn out too bad actually. It could have done with a bit more metallic added to it, but I'm pretty sure that's a lot better than painting it green like they suggested. So I'm well chuffed in the way that's come out. All the ancillaries have been put on and the carburetors. So now it's just a case of damping it down again by giving it a coat of matte varnish. And I'm using my Humbrol one here, which again I've dispensed into these dropper bottles because I find it easier to dispense. So where we go, probably need a couple of coats. There. I'll leave that to dry and then give it a second coat, and that should be hunky dory, that. Right, first things first, this frame looks like it needs to be glued at the headstock. I didn't bother doing that. I've actually gone ahead and primed this, and I've sprayed it in a silver, which is the Vallejo silver here. And then once I've sprayed it silver, I've then given it a coat of clear gloss using the Tamiya clear. And then while that was drying, attached the rear swinging arm here. That's held on by a 1.6mm bolt that goes all the way through the engine casing here. The under seat mudguard and the number plate bracket, that had to be glued as well. That I've sprayed with a primer. I've done it with a matte black, and then I've sprayed it with a Humbrol matte coat, this here. So then it was a case of when the paint was dry to attach the frame to the engine, and the frame is attached using these 1.2mm screws that are 6mm long, and it went together absolutely perfect. I just lined the screws up loosely, and then I tightened them up, and the headstock went together lovely. I had this tube to go up inside, which I assume is the is like a support for the front forks, and all in all it went together really well. And all was left to do then, there was a chain cover here, or a sprocket cover, that I've sprayed aluminium and given it a matte coat. And this ECU unit that gets glued to the back of the frame here, I've left that as it came off the sprue, so I've done no sort of painting on that at all. So that's as far as I've got so far, and here we have it. I'm well chuffed with the way it's turned out. As you can see about that ECU unit, it was one of the plated parts on the sprue. So that's just been glued on. The mud guard and the number plate went together really well. Basically everything went where it had to go, without any sort of forcing of any particular mouldings. It just went together as Tamiya kits go. So that now is finished, that sub-assembly. Then the next stage I've got to do now is the exhaust system. Right, so exhaust system. Now these cans have come off the plated sprue, but I'm not too bothered about the fact that I'm going to have to rub these down, because these are joined in two halves. I've got a horrible seam running top and bottom down them, so I'm going to have to get rid of that seam. Naturally it's going to remove the plating, but this plating isn't chrome. It's representing what I assume is stainless steel, so I can get round by spraying these silencers once I've fettled it, so that doesn't really matter. Now the downpipes as well, I'm going to have to spray. They are going to be sprayed chrome. Now there are guys out there who are quite talented fellas, more talent than I've got with an airbrush, who actually create hot spots on the bends of the downpipes, and they use 2 or 3 different translucent colours to represent this, and I really haven't got the paints to do that, but I might give it a go. I might mix up my own translucent blue and see how it looks, and if it don't work out I'll just spray over it again. So there's 3 parts to the exhaust system. There's a pipe here who's separate. Now obviously these pipes have got seam marks running down them, and I'm going to have to rub those down to get rid of them, otherwise they're going to look horrible. So there's a lot of fettling to do, and a spray job as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and glue these together off camera, and the next clip you'll see would be probably me spraying them with the chrome paint. So I'll see you then. Right, now these three exhaust components, I've fettled them, removed all the seam marks on the downpipes. I've also done some fettling on the actual silencer cans, and it's come out alright actually. Now what I have done, rather than use the grey primer, I've actually well, my light's playing up again. I've actually used a black gloss here. Apparently if you use a black gloss, it can influence the actual finish on the top coat. So I'm looking for the best chrome effect I can get with the paints that I'm using. So this has been dry for about an hour. I'm going to be using my Vallejo chrome, and I'm all ready to give it a go and see how it turns out. Be very careful when you spray metallics, especially silvers. Put too much on, it can ruin it. I'm happy by the way that's gone on. It's gone on nice. Right. Yeah. Obviously going to need a couple of coats. Right, I think that's going to turn out alright. I've gone ahead and fitted this rear wheel. Now because the rear wheel needed painting, I've obviously done the front wheel with it as well. I encountered a bit of a problem here. This screw you see coming through the swinging arm here, I actually attached it so that it ran from the sprocket through the swinging arm, and I did notice at the time that it was a little bit short, and I thought, well, maybe it's just a screw just to retain these parts before a longer one has to be put in. And I was completely wrong in assuming that, because what I should have done, I should have put that screw in first, and then the sprocket should have followed behind, which then would have made the screw the right length. I had a bit of trouble trying to get round the idea. I managed to get round it, but I've ended up having to put a hex bolt through here. I'm fortunate to have some 2mm threads fixings, but unfortunately they're all Allen bolt heads. So where I'm supposed to have a nut, I've got an Allen bolt head showing. It flagged up a couple of problems, but I managed to get round it. It did test my patience. Then we go on to this part here where we've got the I assume that's the oil cooler. That had to be glued to the frame. Now that I didn't do anything with. I painted this bracket the same colour as what I used for the engine casings, but that oil radiator, I left it as natural as it come off the sprue because it's one of the plated ones. And then there was various bits and pieces here that had to be glued to the motor. And we come down here to the footrest, the battery, a few other little bits and pieces as well. And then we come to this, the front cowling, which is attached to the radiator. I'm going to have a chat with you about what happened there. I had a bit of a problem, but other than that, those procedures there I've done there, they all went together quite well. So the next stage is the front end, so I'm going to go off camera and do that, but before I do that I just want to show you what I've done. Right, here she is. Right, you can see me Allen bolt there that's gone through there. I wasn't too impressed by the finish of the back wheel, and I'm not all that keen about the finish on the exhaust system, but it's the best I can do. I matte coated these wheels because I thought the actual finish on the paint was a bit too glossy really, and because I've had trouble trying to put this wheel back on because of the cock up I'd done, I've got a very faint fingerprint on there, but I'm not going to bother respraying it. So the footrest, etc., the exhaust cover there was all part of one thing. I got the battery here that had a decal that I put on. The electrics were down there, and as I said, the exhaust system actually went together quite well. I'll talk about this in a minute. The exhaust system went exactly where it's supposed to have gone. I never had to force anything. Same with all these other components. I never had any trouble. Just that bloody black back wheel, cocking that up. Anyway, getting to this here front piece here. This I've sprayed aluminium. I masked it up and then sprayed this with the spray paint that I bought for the bike, because I've got a feeling that their red spray paint is a lot lighter than their bottled one, and I've been right in assuming that as well, because this is a lot lighter than the bottled red that I've got. So although I've had to go out and spend £6 on a tin of paint, I feel that I've got the right shade. Now the problem I had with this was I obviously primed it and then I masked this off to spray this. I went to use their X22 clear over the top of it and it went all dull on me, and I thought to myself, well, what's going on here? It went almost matte. So I've come to the conclusion that this here isn't compatible with their spray can, which is here. So I had another option. I've got me rattle can gloss here. Oh. This is a Halford's clear lacquer. Now I used this over the top of it and it worked fine. It brought out well, it is very glossy when you paint it, but I need to put a protective coating on it, and one of the reasons why I'm using a clear gloss over it. You could leave it in a natural finish of the paint, but when I go to put the decals on the fairing, I need to seal those, so I need to seal them with the lacquer. So there's two reasons for using the lacquer. Firstly, to protect it, and secondly, to protect the decals. So that there, folks, ain't compatible with their tins. It's not, obviously you got to go and buy their own clear lacquer in these tins. Now the problem is that this tin here cost me $5.99, and their clear lacquers are obviously the same price. And this is 100 mil for $5.99. This Alfred's is 500 mil for $6.99. So I'd rather use this than go out and buy their paints. As much as I like Tamiya stuff, I'm not going to be ripped off. Anyway, that's where we are. Now the reason why I haven't glued this on here, because I'm dubious about the fit when it comes to the rest of the fairing, so I have no intentions of gluing this into its position. He says putting it on the wrong way. There we go. Now this pipe here is supposed to meet this radiator, and it's not. I don't know why, because it's all governed by the position of this here, because this is all one piece. So I'm bewildered as to why that is a mile out. I mean, there's no way I can sort of move that up there. I suppose I could try and heat it, but then I could melt other things. So what I might do with that, because it's all behind the fairing, I might actually just snip that off there and do away with it. Like I say, I really don't know why it's not meeting up. There might be a reason for it, but I don't know. Anyway, I intend to leave that unstuck so that when the rest of the fairing comes on, I want to make sure that it mates up with the other side fairings, because if it don't and I've glued it, I've obviously got to try and unstick it and get it to line up. So that's where we are with that. That's a couple of problems I had along the way. Other than that, I am enjoying the build. It's very time consuming now. Anyway, I'm going to go off camera now, and I'll crack on with the front end, and I'll probably show you some clips of me spraying the wheels, I think, and the frame following this clip. So I'll see you when I go to fit the front end. So I'll see you then. Bye. Right, I just thought I'd show you where I am with the wheels. The assembly after the exhaust system is pointing out the back wheel assembly, so I've decided to spray both wheels. I've used the X12 Tamiya gold leaf for that. Now I've decided to not spray that with a gloss, but to do it with a matte, because at the moment I'm not too keen on how it's looking. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to spray both wheels with the Umbro matte coat, and I think it might look a bit better. So I've got my airbrush all set up here, and away we go. and I think that will probably do for that, just one coat. I think that's calmed it down a lot actually. Right, do the other wheel. Obviously that's giving it a nice protective coat as well. The last thing I want to do is go to fit the tyres and find it chips of paint. Anyway, that's looking good. That I need to sort out that bloody light there, it keeps flicking on and off. I have to look at the switch on it. So that's the wheels primed, sprayed and matte coated. Right, I'm all set up to do some priming. Now the front suspension units here have come off the plated sprue. The only thing that needs to be given a plated look is where I've clipped the crocodile clips. I've masked that off to stop paint going on there obviously, and I'm using the crocodile clip to hold the part there as well. The rest of the forks have to be sprayed, so rubbing down that seam line either side of it hasn't been so much of a worry. So those two are set up, ready to be sprayed. Got the disc brakes here. And we've got the mud guard, and the mud guard I've joined. I've used baking powder and ultra thin super glue down the inside of that seam. That when that gets placed together, that oozes out through the seam, and when it goes off really hard, unlike the normal glue. So then I'm able to rub that down to get rid of the seam mark. I use 320 emery cloth to rub it down with, but I also use some soap liquid in some water as well. So I feel confident that when that gets sprayed with a primer, that seam shouldn't show. If it does, I'll just rub it down again. So I'm going to crack on and get these primed. Bloody switch on that light. I'm going to crack on and spray these with the primer, and then the next clip I'll probably show you where I'm spraying this mud guard red. So I'll see you then. Right, I'm going to go through with you what I've done to the front end. Now I've glued this front mud guard together. I've also ran some ultra thin super glue around the inside of the actual seam and sprinkled some baking powder on there as well, just to give it some strength, and that went together quite well. I had a bit of a problem getting a decent finish, not on the seam, but there was where this bit of plastic is here. It's like a location pin. For some reason it seemed to be sunk, and it took me a while to get rid of it, but the actual seam itself is now, it's not visible. The front discs have been attached to the front wheel, and the suspension forks, they came off the plated sprue, and I ended up having to mask up that area there to retain the plating. Otherwise the rest of it was just sprayed gold, and this was sprayed the colour of the engine casings. Now I've highlighted here these tubes. I'm not going to bother putting these tubes on until the very last minute. They just represent cables, etc. I've made the rear stand up. That was nice and straightforward. I haven't done any painting on it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. And then there's the assembly using the 1.6mm bolt that goes down through the headstock and into this part here, and that all lined up really nice, no problem with that. The handlebar grips and brake lever, clutch lever, etc. that I hand painted while it's on the sprue, and then I glued it onto these supports afterwards. So that led me to this part, the front headlight. Now this is supposed to have slipped onto this protrusion here, but unfortunately I had a bit of a mishap. I accidentally dropped the bloody bike on the floor, and guess what, that bit there broke off. But I feel confident that I've managed to glue this in the right position. So I've got around that, but it could have been a lot easier. This steering damper was a pain in the ass from the start to the finish. This came off the plated sprue, and I cut it off. I trimmed the little bits of excess plastic, and as I put it down, the bloody thing snapped in half. But it was possible to still use it because there was still enough length there for it to go inside the actual damper. And these two parts had eyelets that had to pop onto little tiny ball joints, and I was struggling with them, and I put my hands up and I've binned those. I really couldn't be bothered with the hassle with it. I didn't want to glue them. I wanted them to fit as they should have done, but because this had snapped in half, it just wasn't supported enough. That could have done with going right the way through there. But that's my fault. This I've glued together, but I've yet to fit to the bike. And the other components, such as the master cylinders for the clutch and brake, that's been done, but they haven't been painted yet. I've still got that to do. So that's as far as I am with it at the moment, because the next stage is the actual fairings. So I've just got a couple more things to do in regards the components on the front end. But there you are. That's the front end all nicely screwed on. Everything went together as it should do, really nice. So all that remains is to put the clocks on and to give these a coat of paint. I find it easier if I glue them onto the actual handlebars and paint them in situ. Right, I've glued this in two halves. I've ran ultra thin super glue down through there and some baking powder to give it some strength. I then got some wet and dry, and I've gone over the seam that's running down the centre here up over the tank, and also I've rubbed down this area here because this was a separate piece that had to be glued in on the back. Now what I'm going to do now, I'm going to see how successful that's been, and the only way to find out is to give it a coat of primer. So that's what I intend to do at the moment. First of all, I seem to have paint all over my bloody gloves here. Not ideal. There we go. Yeah, so I'm gonna give it a try with some primer and see if it still needs some fettling. Right, let's see what happens here. Just a nice light dusting to start with. I'm going to go too mad, too quick. Right, I'm going to let that dry and I'll check it over and see if it's any good. Right, in the previous clip I mentioned that I would show you some spraying of the top coat, but I got carried away, and although I've got footage that I'm going to show you of the actual primer being applied, I was going to wait till the following evening to do the top coat, but I decided to do the top coat about 3 hours after doing the primer, and I just got carried away. I forgot all about filming it, etc. Sometimes when you're doing a build on camera, this does happen. Sometimes you just get carried away and you forget all about the actual footage. So apologies for not showing you the spraying of the top coat. Obviously I've also gone ahead and applied all the decals, and what I've got left to do now is to spray that with a clear lacquer. Now that I will put on camera, I will film myself doing that. Now I've obviously used the primer, as you can see in one of the clips. I've had to resort to using this Vallejo primer, which I don't really get on with, but unfortunately I'm struggling to try and find the usual primer that I use. Everybody seems to be out of stock of it. I think there's a bit of a distribution problem with it, so I've had to resort to the Vallejo. It did go on okay. I never had any issues with it. I didn't have any issues with the Tamiya rattle can here. It's all sprayed up quite nicely, and the decals went on really nice as well. Right, so what I'm going to use is this Alfred's clear lacquer. As you're aware, the Tamiya clear lacquer I tried on the lower fairing wasn't successful, so I am taking a bit of a risk here in the fact that I don't know whether this is going to react with the decals or not. So fingers crossed it should be alright. Now I've got a heater behind me and a shelf, and I put this on that shelf to warm it up, because the last thing you want to do when it's a cold evening like I'm experiencing here is to spray this below its proper temperature, because all it will do is bloom. In other words, it will make the supposedly clear lacquer go all opaque. So my parts have been warmed up and the tin's been warmed up, so we should be all okay. So cocktail stick, bit of blue tack. Let's rock and roll. You can see I've been spraying red here. Right, I'm going to put that on my shelf. I'm finding it needs probably about 2 coats. Right, let's see what happens. That seems okay on there. Right, I should probably give that a second coat. If it's going to react with the decals, it would have done so far now, so I'm thankful for that. So that should give me a nice clear gloss now, and that will obviously protect the paint. And although that Tamiya paint is very good quality paint, just adding that clear lacquer just brings out the shine in it. Now obviously I'm going to have to give this a second coat, but I shan't be bothering to show you that. So the next stage, I know I shouldn't be saying this, but the next stage, this will be bolted to the bike along with the rest of the fairing. Well, that's my plan anyway. I obviously got some details to do. The petrol cap is yet to be done, but I don't see the point of doing that yet. So yeah, I'll see you in the next clip. Right, so the two halves of the fairing went together. I used ultra thin super glue for that and baking powder. The windscreen was glued to this front part of the fairing. I used white PVA glue for that. Now all my clear plastic parts get put into a bowl of this solution here. Pledge multi-surface polish. I water this down 50-50, and what I do, all the plastic clear parts I dip into this, and then I lay them on some absorbent material for it to wick away the excess, and I leave it overnight, and the clarity is absolutely fantastic after dipping them in this. It makes a vast difference to it. So obviously the rear lens as well went through that treatment as well. These lenses here had to be red, so I painted them from red from the inside, and they came out alright actually. The fitting of that fairing was absolutely bang on, and never had any trouble with it. The screws all went where they're supposed to have gone. It's showing the rear wheel stand there, but that's been attached to the bike for quite some time now. Right, this is where we come to the mirrors. I sprayed these, glued the lenses in, and then suddenly dawned on me that for these to be glued to that fairing, it involves just gluing them using the flat surface of the mirrors. There's no location pin or nothing for that, and I've made the grave mistake of not gluing these before I went ahead and sprayed the fairing. I'm not willing to risk gluing these on the model now and find that it ruins the paintwork. So in hindsight, I should have glued those to the fairing and then cleaned up whatever glue was present, and then they would have looked far better than the black that they suggested, just sprayed color coded red with the fairing. So that's a thing that is my fault. I should have looked ahead, and I didn't. So the mirrors aren't attached to the bike. The other problem I had with it was I made these 4 indicators. I glued all 4 on. Following day, one of them was drooping, and I went to sort of straighten it up, and it just fell off. Basically because I was trying to glue these with paint on the glue surfaces. Sometimes you can get away with it, but these didn't want to glue properly at all, so I removed them, and I thought I'd put those on right at the last minute. I took 4 off, I put 4 in a pot. I went to put them on last night, and I've only got 3 in the pot. One's gone missing. So I was in a dilemma. I thought to myself, do I just put 2 on the back and forget the front ones? But I've decided now not to bother with any of them, and I'm hoping in the future that I might come across that indicator. It could be on the floor in here, it could be tucked away on the bench here somewhere, but I'm bewildered as to why one's gone missing. So mirrors aren't on the bike, indicators aren't on the bike, and of course previously the steering damper broke, if you remember, so that's not on there. This is just the usual thing with screwing the fairings on. They all lined up lovely. I never had any trouble with those whatsoever. They screwed together fine there, and all the location pins went where they are supposed to have gone. Number plate was put on, and that's it, folks. It was then a case of placing the decals on, which I'd done with the fairings, with the bodywork off. So I applied the decals to that, and I've given it a blanket spray of clear lacquer, so those decals are now protected. So that's where we are, folks. So I'll reveal the finished product. There we go. So everything I've discussed is being covered, I think. Now obviously I've made this plinth up. This is a bit of hardwood. This is 150 grade wet and dry to give the impression of tarmac. I've super glued the stand to that, and I've also got an upstand there with a M3 thread going through it. That's actually going into the fairing, and it's been arrowdited. So that is very secure on there now. So yeah, it's turned out really well. I don't know if you can see that screen, the shine on that screen. I made the little plaque up. These are decals that were left over from the build, and yeah, I think that's about it. I really enjoyed doing that. It's a shame about the indicators and the mirrors, but to be honest, I'm not all that bothered about it. I've actually put these up on my Facebook page, pictures of this bike, and nobody's come back to say, oi, your indicators are missing and mirrors. So I don't think it's going to be noticeable. Now I had to buy a rattle can to spray this with. Now I normally use an airbrush, but unfortunately the red that I would have used wasn't the right colour, and I've done right in buying their rattle can, because their rattle can red is a lot lighter than the bottled red that they've got here. So although it's cost me £6 to spray that, where it would have cost me probably less than £1 using a bottle paint, I think I've hit the nail on the head with the right colour there, because the other red I have used on this, see, this is a slightly darker red. I'm trying to get him in there. This is a darker red than that, so I'm well chuffed that I've spent the extra to get the right shade of red. So there we go. Right, well, that's it then. Thanks for watching. I hope I haven't bored you to tears. I'm hoping that these videos I put up on here actually inspire people to go out and take up the hobby. It can be frustrating at times, and obviously it can be expensive. You know, these kits are fairly cheap enough to buy, but the trouble is that the price starts soaring up when you have to start paying for paints. And if you haven't got an airbrush, buying rattle can paints can become expensive. But if you're looking at just making one, it doesn't really matter. But if you plan on making quite a few of these, an airbrush is a very good investment, really. So I'll see you in another video, whatever that will be. I don't upload a great deal of videos because out of probably 5 kits that I make, only one gets put up on YouTube. I don't get the same satisfaction out of doing these kits when I've got to create videos for them, which is why you'd never see me actually doing any building on camera. So anyway, I shall hopefully see you all again sometime, and thanks to all my subscribers, etc., and thanks for being patient. So I'll see you soon. Bye.